Hello everyone, welcome to the WASABI Aquarium channel. In this episode, I'll be starting a mini-series talking about how to plant your first planted aquarium. This time I will be teaching you the 3 things you should know before planting your new aquarium. For quite a while now, I've been getting many messages from my viewers asking me to talk about the basics of starting a new planted aquarium. So if you are either thinking about starting your first planted aquarium ever, you are a beginner struggling to get any plants in the soil, or the plants you got into the soil just keep floating away, then this video should be very helpful to you. As I mentioned earlier, for this episode, I'll be teaching you the 3 things you should know before planting your new aquarium. These 3 points are the most important thing to remember, so make sure you do not forget these. If you remember these 3 points, you will have a much easier and more fun time planting your aquarium. So to start, point number 1 is about how to properly get your plants ready for planting. The second point is about tools. Specifically, we're going to be talking about tweezers, or pincets in Japan, and how to pick the best ones. And the final point, we'll be talking about the actual technique and common mistakes involved in planting your plants. For this video, I'll be talking about point number 1, how to get your plants ready for planting. The plant that I'm using for this example is a type of plant that I think everyone has seen at least once, whether from a photo or in person. This plant has a main stem through the middle, with the plants growing out of that center stem. This plant is what would be categorized as a background plant in the hobby. So for this example, I'll be showing you how to prepare a background plant to make it as easy as possible to plant. In this case, the top side of the plant is in my right hand, and the bottom side is down here with the root sticking out. Now, before you start planting, you may have noticed that there are some leaves growing at the bottom area of the stem. If you wanted to, you can plant this stem without doing anything, but for most beginners, these leaves can be quite the headache to deal with. When you go to plant this into the soil, the leaves become a point of resistance, and more often than not end up as a shallowly planted stem. Then, when you fill the aquarium with water, this shallow stem ends up getting uprooted and ends up floating away. So in order to avoid these background plants floating away, you should prep these lower leaves. To put it simply, you can just pluck all the leaves off the bottom. In fact, let me do that real quick. What happens if you pluck those leaves off though, is that planting will be super easy, but in exchange it makes the plant that much easier to uproot. The plant will basically slip out of the soil as easy as it did slip into it. So instead of plucking all those leaves off, I actually recommend you just cut those leaves in half like so, including some of the middle area. It doesn't have to be precise, just kind of snip away without thinking too much about it. So kind of like this. If you make the leaves smaller instead of removing it, it becomes easier to plant overall. This is because the plant will enter the soil easier compared to leaving the leaves on. Also, because there are still some leaves left, they will act as an anchor in the soil, making it difficult to uproot. This preparation is definitely a way to make sure you end up in between 2 extremes. One side is leaving all of the leaves alone, which makes it difficult to plant deep, and the other is cutting off all the leaves, which makes it challenging to prevent that plant from floating away. In the end, the amount of leaf you cut off is completely up to you within reason. Again, by leaving a small amount of leaves on the bottom part of the stem, it makes it difficult for the plant to get uprooted compared to taking off all of the leaves on the bottom. So I do recommend you do this as part of preparation for an easier time planting. And that was scenario number 1. For scenario number 2, let's say you have a stem that looks like this, or you have a new stem growing out of the bottom of the main stem. A question that many beginners have asked me is what should they do when they run into a stem like this? I'll normally be asked if the plant should be left alone and planted the way it is, or if they should cut that new stem off and plant the two separately. I personally recommend you cut off that new stem in this situation. Now, if you just plant it the way it is right now, you will get the benefit of having the plant grow out nicer in terms of volume, but for beginners, I recommend planting as many stems as you can. When you plant a bunch of stems, it becomes a sort of practice drill for your planting technique. So again, for beginners, I recommend cutting off that new stem so that you have more stems for planting. Before you cut off that side stem, I recommend you cut from the main stem slightly above where that new stem is growing from. When you cut the new stem off in this way, it will have a better chance of growing into its own main plant. This way you end up with two proper plants rather than one plant plus some extra. And then, if you look at this stem closely again, you can see that it has another new stem growing out of it. Just like the last one, you can also cut this one off slightly above where it's growing off of the main stem. Now, as you can see, there are 3 solid plants that are ready to be planted. If you look even closer, then you'll see that there are even more new stems going all the way to the top of the main stem. But you don't want to go that far with the separations, or else you risk killing that main stem. So make sure you leave some of that main stem intact and not cut it up all the way. And that's how you prepare your typical background plant. If you do these steps, you will have a more successful and fun time planting your new plants. Before we move on, there's one more point that I want to cover. This advice is geared towards more intermediate to advanced hobbyists, mainly because I get asked about this even from those who have been in the hobby for many years. And here's the example for this scenario. If you look closely, you can see that in the upper areas of the stem, there are brand new roots growing out of the main stem. So the question I get asked often in this case is, what should I do with these new roots growing out of the upper area of the plant? My answer to this question is if these roots get in the way, then it is safe to cut them off. With these types of roots, there is no chance that they will start to rot just because you cut them off. So if it bothers you, cut it off. If it doesn't, which I know there are those of you out there, then leave it alone. These roots are very inconsequential, and you won't really see a difference whether you cut them off or not. Basically, if you want to cut them off, please do that. If you don't, that's perfectly okay. There is one thing that you should be careful of, and that is if you are removing these roots by hand, there is a risk that you tear the stem from trying to pluck that root. So to avoid that, just use some scissors and gently cut those roots off. So, how's the video? For this video, I introduced the 3 things you should know before planting your new aquarium, with an emphasis on how to get your plants ready for you to plant them. This topic of plant preparation isn't geared only towards beginners, but also to intermediate or advanced aquarists, as it is a skill that everyone should know. Doing proper plant preparation will lead you to creating a beautiful aquascape, so I recommend everyone to do this. Now, to some people, the actual planting phase could be considered to be the quote-unquote main part of keeping plants. But without that prep beforehand, you won't have as smooth of a time planting. So it is a pretty tedious job, but it goes a long way in making a beautiful aquascape. This video covered point number 1 of plant preparation, and so next video will cover point number 2, which is going to be about the tools. After the tools episode, I will make a video covering that last point, which is the technique involved in planting. So please check back periodically if you want to see these new videos. If you have any other questions about this topic of plant preparation, please feel free to write a comment in the comment section below. When coming up with a new video, if I see the same sorts of question asked multiple times by many different people, then I will make a video answering those questions. So again, if you have any more questions, please ask, as it really helps me out. Unfortunately, due to how busy I am running my shop, I won't be able to answer everyone's questions one-on-one. I apologize, and I hope that you can understand my situation. If you enjoy watching this sort of planted aquarium content, then please leave a like and subscribe to the WASABI Aquarium channel to keep up with new uploads. That's the end of the video. Thank you for watching.